Can England respond this weekend? Defeat to the All Blacks on Saturday, but it is the Wallabies up next. And it's Tuesday, which means it's team news. That seems to be the way now for England. So I'm going to get into it in this video, talking about the England team that Steve Borthwick has named. Unchanged starting 15, some changes on the bench though. We'll get into all of that. The comment section is where you can have your say whilst you're here, like the video, and also I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. But let's get straight into it. This is the team. This is the matchday 23. And as I say, they're unchanged. The starting 15 is unchanged. I'll come onto the bench in just a minute. But why did England go unchanged this weekend? Because for whatever you think of team selections and international selections, and if you go on the comments on social media, there will always be people saying, why isn't this player playing? Why has this player been selected, etc., etc. But a coach like Steve Borthwick, who is so methodical, who is so thorough in his preparation, why has he gone for this? Because he wouldn't do it if he didn't think this was the best course of action for his team this weekend. And I suppose, first of all, I think it refers back to last weekend and that narrow defeat. And looking at Jamie George in that press conference afterwards, he was absolutely gutted. And I would imagine the rest of the team felt exactly the same. This is a team that will be hurting, because they will realise what an opportunity it was to beat the All Blacks last weekend. They could have, they should have probably won that game, and they didn't. So on the one hand, unchanged starting 15, go out there and make amends this weekend. The other part of that as well is England were leading 60 minutes into that game. I suppose I think the first bench replacements came on around in the 50-minute area, 53 minutes, something like that. But it was a team that actually went out there and did a pretty good job for the bulk of the game. So go out there and do it again, but this time as a matchday squad, let's go and execute. I think that's number one. I also think it just keeps everything really settled, because one thing that defeat did last weekend, and one of the reasons I think from an England perspective it was so disappointing, was because what an opportunity it was. What an opportunity it was to set their stall out at the start of this autumn and give them a positive platform moving forward. And now it's the opposite of that. And it's marginal stuff, right? It's a penalty kick that hits the post rather than sneaks through, a drop goal that just goes wide to the right rather than goes through. If those things are different, this is a very, very different conversation. There's a very different feel about this team. But I think naturally after a defeat like that, when you're so gutted, it unsettles everything a little bit, but you keep the team the same, it just settles everything down. And I also think that's a good reason to name it on Tuesday rather than waiting until Thursday. Because the narrative now with the team starts building towards that Australia game, rather than externally lingering on the defeat to New Zealand. I know internally from Monday they'd have been focusing on the weekend ahead, but I just think externally everyone's focus is now going to be this coming weekend. So from that point of view, I think unchanged makes a lot of sense. Plus, from a performance point of view, which I guess is the number one reason, I thought the starting team did pretty well. Look, it wasn't perfect against the All Blacks, but overall I thought the starting team did pretty well. So therefore, they deserve an opportunity to go back out there and try and do it again. So Genge, George, Stewart, the front row, they did well. I think they all did pretty well in the first 60 minutes of the game, or 50 minutes I guess it was for the front row. They won some scrum penalties. Itoje and Martin, second row, back row makes sense. In fact, all through the team, I suppose it's unchanged, but there are changes. Let me get onto that part of the video. First of all, in the starting 15, Henry Slade has moved to 12. Him and Ollie Lawrence have switched. Lawrence goes to 13, Slade goes to 12. The good things about that, Lawrence plays 13 for his club. He is best as an outside centre. So I think it's good to get him into that channel. The question marks around that selection, I guess it means England are playing with a double playmaker. It's going to the Marcus Smith at 10. You've got Henry Slade at 12. So what does the double playmaker do? One thing England did struggle with, I think, against the All Blacks, more than anything else, arguably, was getting their attacking game flowing and looking really dynamic. Having Slade at 12 as more of a distributor, are they going to be able to get the players out wide into the game more? Possibly. Certainly something to keep an eye on. What does it also do to England's defence? Because a big reason, as was spoken about last week, of Henry Slade being rushed back into the team despite not having played for Exeter was the importance for him in the outside centre channel to England's defence. Now, he might still defend there. I think this is probably going to be a situation where Slade defends at 13 and attacks at 12. But again, that's certainly something to keep an eye on with this England defence and how these centres work. I mean, centre is one of those things, isn't it, that is so interchangeable. There's such moving parts that it's not a huge adjustment, I don't think. But let me know if you disagree with that. The other changes to the team are on the bench. So it's a 5-3 bench rather than a 6-2. Ben Curry drops out and it's Ollie Slightholme that comes in, and then Luke Cowan-Dickie comes in for Theo Dan as well. Theo Dan, by the way, I know he had the head knock towards the end of the New Zealand game. From what I've seen reported, he passed his head injury assessment, so it's not actually injury related, which is in itself quite interesting. Why do you go with Luke Cowan-Dickie? Set piece? Is that scrum? England again against the All Blacks when their front row replacements came on, their scrum was under more pressure. Does Cowan-Dickie shore that up a bit for them? That to me probably seems like the most obvious reason that you go with him over Theo Dan. They're both good options. Theo Dan's the younger guy coming into the team. Luke Cowan-Dickie is a bit more experienced as well, but I think it's probably more to do with set piece. 5-3 fascinates me. Why'd you go with Slightholme? Particularly when Ben Curry's the forward to miss out, because I thought Ben Curry probably had the biggest impact out of all the forwards that came off the bench last week. So why does he miss out? And I just look at the bench still. Dombrant and Asikwe. Good player, really, really good club players. In Dombrant's case, exceptional club player. Consistently one of the best players in his position in the Premiership. Not sure we've ever quite seen it week in, week out for England. And maybe he's never quite been able to lock down that position in the team. It's hard when you're on the bench or you're coming in and you're coming out. But I have question marks there. And the same with Asikwe. I think for the size of player, I'm not sure we see the impact consistently for England. Is that unfair on those guys? The bench is so crucial. We keep seeing it for England, particularly in the last 3 games they've played against the All Blacks. Their bench has lost out, essentially. The All Blacks bench has had a more consistent impact on the game and therefore the outcome in the game, because all 3 test matches have been so close, than England's has. I should also mention, and I'm going to say this right now, I do not get the criticism of George Ford from last weekend. I think it's absolutely right that he is still there. Yes, he missed the penalty. Yes, he missed the drop goal. For a kicker, those things happen. George Ford has been brilliant for England on many occasions from the tee and from dropping goals, by the way. If we look back to the Argentina game in the last World Cup, it's just one of those things that sometimes it happens. And the setup for the drop goal, as has been pretty thoroughly analysed, wasn't good from England at all. And I also really like that you stick with Randall and Ford in this situation. Going back to what I mentioned at the start of the video, if you want to keep a settled camp, one way to ensure that it is unsettled is off the back of the final 20 minutes of a game, making changes to the halfbacks. I just don't think that that would be a worthwhile option for England. It's more about when and whether you make those replacements, that's on the coaches, and then how you approach the game, I think, in the final 20 minutes. And your setup in that final phase, from the scrum to the drop goal, it's the whole team thing. So I'm backing Ford and Randall to still go again. I think many of you may well disagree with me. I've seen George Ford get a fair bit of criticism, but not on this channel, not from me, not from the end of that game at the weekend. For me, that was not the reason. It wasn't the fundamental reason why England lost the game, George Ford coming on, in my opinion. But that's the team. I'm really interested in the 5-3. Maybe it's they don't think Australia have as much firepower in the forwards. They don't have as much power off the bench as the All Blacks did. We'll wait and see. The final thing I'll say is what a massive game this is for England. They should beat Australia. They should beat Australia. But there's pressure on them to do just that. They cannot lose this game. All of a sudden, their autumn is in, from a results point of view, disarray if they lose this weekend. I think they will get the job done. I think this team is good enough to. And I think this team will want to put in a performance. Will want to put in a performance to exercise the demons of last weekend and exercise the demons of the last few games where they've had narrow defeats, to really put in a performance against this Wallabies side, who themselves will be a big challenge. I think Skelton's back in, isn't he? Karevi's part of the team again. So having just said they don't have as much power, that's quite a lot of power they've got coming back in. Overall, I think England at home should have enough. We'll wait and see what team the Wallabies name, which I presume is going to be on Thursday. As I said already, let me know in the comment section, what do you make of that England team? Would you have liked to have seen more changes, or do you agree with me that actually keeping it settled is a good thing? And in particular, the changes on the bench. Replacements are key for England at the moment. Frankly, putting it in blunt terms, they haven't quite been doing enough. So what do you make of it? Like the video as well, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.